Hello, lovely student. Welcome to my lesson on methods. In today's lesson, I'm going to present the solution to the coding challenge 2. So very simple graphical user interface. I've just got a memo or a rich edit to do display and a button called calculate distance where I'm going to call my function and display the distance, the x pos, y pos, and the time. So just let's look at creating the function first. So we first had to create a function, and the function had to calculate the distance and return the distance as an integer value. So I started off with the keyword function, the name of the function called calculate distance. And this function is bringing in two values as a parameter. The location of the animal, which is the x coordinate, and the location of the animal, y coordinate. Those two values are of data type integer. So those are the two parameters I'm bringing into the function. The function is then calculating the distance by finding the square root of the distance between the watering hole and the location of the animal squared, and it finds the square root, you're rounding off the square root, and you're sending out an integer value. So remember, I'm just going to comment that your Control, Shift, and C will take you to the framework. So let's look at the function calculate distance. Okay, so again, remember I'm bringing in two values as a parameter. A parameter brings in a value into a method, and a method could be a function or a procedure. And in this case, because it is returning a value, we are writing a function. So the key word to look for in any question, if the question says the method returns a value, you have to write a function. Okay, and also remember that function, the method definition, and this function is returning a data type integer. I've declared variables to calculate the distance, and I've declared two variables for the coordinates of the watering hole. So I created a variable called iWaterX, and I initialized it to a value 10, and iWaterY, and I initialized it to a value 10. These two values were given in the question. I'm then using the distance formula, and the distance formula says use the x position or the x coordinate, use the x coordinate of the location of the animal, and in the first index of the array, the x coordinate was the value 12. Okay, so I'm just using it as an example to teach you how to break down this equation. But remember, x pos and y pos are going to be passed as arguments when calculate distance is called. So when we call the function, two values are going to be sent to the function, and those two values are going to be mapped onto x pos and y pos. So in the first example of the array, the mapping will be the value 12 is going to be sent in to the function, and 12 is going to be mapped onto x pos. So 12 minus 10 and that squared. So that will actually give you 2 squared plus y pos again in the first cell of the array was 15. So 15 minus 10 will give you 5, and this 5 squared. So it's going to be 2 squared plus 5 squared, which will actually give you 4 and 25, which will then give you 29. And then you're finding the square root of 29, and you're rounding it off to give you I distance, which will be rounded off to a value of 5. And then all you're doing is taking the distance and using the reserved word result, the function returns the calculated distance. Remember, you could use the keyword result, or alternatively, you could use the name of the function to send out the value. Okay, so now let's look at when we call this function, what happens? We wrote a function. The function doesn't have any value if it is not called. So let's go and see how we call the function. So on your button calculate distance, the first thing that I asked you to do was to copy the values of the array, to populate each cell of the array with a string value. And the string value represented the x coordinate of the location of the animal, followed by a comma, the y coordinate of the location of the animal, followed by a colon, and then the time. And here all you did, populating the array using assignment statements. I created variables to extract the x position, so the x coordinate, the y coordinate, and to find the position of the comma, to find the position of the colon, and an I loop counter because I'm going to loop through the array. Okay, so I set up my tab settings so that I could neatly align each column. Okay, so you have your tab settings, and then before the for loop, I've got a heading, distances from the watering hole, and then the headings for time, the distance, and the x coordinate and y coordinate. I then run my loop from 1 to 12 because that's the size of the array. There are 12 values, string values into the array. You can do one of two things. I'm just going to put a comment here, and I'm going to show you that you could have created a string variable called sLine, and you could have said sLine takes on ARR entries, the name of the array. If you call it ARR points, that's fine too, of index I. So you could have read the contents of the array and stored it in a variable called sLine, and then instead of having the array here, you could just find the position of the comma in sLine. Okay, so here all you're doing, again, I just want to write it for those of you that didn't understand me, you're finding the position of the comma in sLine. So then you can just use sLine. So how you want to code is going to be up to you. Okay, so for this exercise, I wanted to teach you and show you that you could use the array. Okay, but depending on how you want to code, if you wanted to store it in a variable, that is fine too. So the first step was to find the position of the comma. So let's just put down, those of you that didn't understand, the array had 12, comma, 15, colon, the first cell of the array, the string value, and it had those values. Okay, so find the position of the comma in the array. So it's going to find this position here. Then I want to copy from the array, starting at position 1, and take the position of the comma minus 1 characters. So xpos is going to be the x coordinate, which is 12. I'm then going to find the position of the colon. So using pos again, I find the position of the colon in the array. I then copy from the array, start at the position of the comma plus 1. Start at the position of the comma plus 1. So it'll copy from here, from 1. And take the position of the colon minus the position of the comma minus 1. So that will copy the 15, the y coordinate. To get the time, I'm copying from the array, start at the position of the colon plus 1. So it's going to start at the 0. I then, to get the distance, I call my function calculate distance. Note that the loop is running for I starts off at 1 to 12. This loop is going to run 12 times. And each time I is 1, it's going to read the first cell of the array. When I is 2, it's going to read the second cell of the array. And it's going to do this 12 times. So you're going to be calling this function for each cell of the array. So one of the advantages of using functions is to prevent the repetition of coding. So instead of writing this 12 times, you write one function, but call it 12 times. The function was written with 2 parameters. I brought in 2 parameters into the function. When the function is called, I must call it with 2 values that are being sent as an argument to this function calculate distance. So note again, the function was declared with 2 parameters. When it is called, it must be called with 2 parameters. The order must also be the same and the data type must be the same. So the value of xpos, whatever value that you are getting here, when I is 1, it's reading the first cell of the array. It's getting the x coordinate of the location of the animal. Here I'm sending in the value to the function, but this value that I'm getting from here is mapped onto that value. And that is how I'm able to use the x coordinate in the function. Whatever value that you are bringing in, that is the value that you're going to be using in the function. Okay, and then all I'm doing is displaying the time, the distance, the x coordinate, and the y coordinate. The question was pretty long. It entailed you having to do a lot of reading and brainstorming the question into smaller subsections until you realized what was expected of you. I just want to advise you that that happens in every matric examination, your final examination, your exit examination. There's volumes of reading and interpretation. So underline key words and phrases. For example, the function returns a value. The word return must tell you that it's a function. And when you're brainstorming through a problem and you're going through the question, step through the question and underline key words so that you understand and make meaning in the simplest of form. There are going to be lots of reading in any programming question, but actually when you look at it, come down to actually solving the problem, it didn't take long to solve the problem and it was pretty easy. If you knew the functions of the math unit, square, square root, and round, this would have been easy for you. And if you knew all your functions of the string, copy and pause, you would have been fine. This particular coding challenge would have been really easy for you. Let's run this program and see how it works. Okay, so calculate distance. It displays the time, the distance, the x coordinate, and the y coordinate. And don't forget your headings. Also remember, in any examination, your sample display must look identical to the sample displayed as a sample output given by the examiner. So although the question might not ask you to write suitable headings, but your sample output must have distances from the watering hole. It must look identical to the sample output given by the examiner. Thank you, learners, for listening. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and follow me on my next video.